founded upon the notion that jury of one's peers can conduct an arm's length of review of a case about the guilt or lack of thereof of the alleged infraction. Okay? But however, like the moment that a party is sued, there's a clear incentive to influence the jury in its favor. You know, much of this convincing takes place in the courtroom, but like the one power that large and publicly facing and well-funded organizations have at their disposal is to do some of this convincing outside of the courtroom. Okay, is this not moving? Okay. Now in this paper, we are essentially, documenting evidence for one form of influence. You know, we are just showing that the local advertising of firms increase in the court they are being sued. So specifically, we show the advertising dynamics before and after the litigation in the region where the firm is sued, and we also like analyze whether such a response happens in other places. Now we test this legal actions between 1995 to 2014, and we focus on the legal, the trials that sort of were seen, not the ones that are settled outside of the court system. You know, we show that, the patterns we are showing is kind of spread throughout the US, across industries over time, but there's one common response by the defendants. Okay, so what we show, okay, so there's one punchline of this paper. Upon being sued in a given location, firms significantly increase the advertising in that location. And in terms of magnitude, this is about like quarter, like 23% following the suit. In contrast, we see no increase by the same firm in other places. Okay, so like if I want to like summarize the paper in one figure, just imagine that this is like DMA, the designated market environment, the place where we can measure the advertising. Before the lawsuit, there is no advertising increase, like that's pretty much like stable. There's a sharp increase after being litigated, and which like reverses after the litigation is over. But the same firm doesn't do such a like increase in the advertising in other places. So if I want to put names, like, if suppose the Walmart is sued in Akron, Ohio in 2001, we see a spike in Walmart's advertising directly following this lawsuit, but we don't see such an increase in Walmart's advertising policy leading up to the suit. Walmart doesn't increase advertising in, say, Toledo, which is kind of like similar size market with similar growth rates leading up to 2001. Moreover, a competitor of Walmart, say Target, doesn't show any kind of increase or change in their advertising, which is kind of to get to this issue that, is this a location time effect? Okay, so that's basically the identification. And to give you some background about like, how we came up with this idea, maybe some of you are familiar with this concept of like patent trolls. So Lauren and I have a few papers on litigation in the patent litigation, and how this sort of happens to be like very pronounced in certain locations. And one example that was told us by some of the market participants was Samsung. Yeah. Samsung is an electronics company. It's from Korea. Most of you know. They have more U.S. active patents than any other entity. Okay, and then this company has been sued in Marshall, Texas, which happens to be a hotbed of litigation. Not really, but it's not like Silicon Valley. But it turns out that just they are being like when you look at the intellectual property cases, this East Texas district happens to be a really like just the major place where most of this litigation happens. So the issue here is just that sort of geographic dispersion was investigated in other papers. But what we are doing in this paper is how did Samsung respond to this litigation? So what we sort of like saw when we dig in data, they start just financing certain things in East Texas. They were the major like sponsor of a winter festival in Marshall, Texas. They happen to be the only sort of, there is like one open air ice skating rink in East Texas, which happens to be right in front of this court, and it has Samsung written around it, back in the time when they were litigated. So on top of that, just they gave high school scholarships. It's normal to give, and I mean, you could expect something to be really prominent in terms of scholarship for like science and technology. But as far as I know, like football is not really big in Korea, but they happen to be the sponsor of football in East Texas. Okay, like similar things that exist in other areas, other companies. Chevron was sued under the Alien Tort Claims Act by a Nigerian villagers because of like human rights violation. Uh, so like in response, Chevron responded to this by Power of Human Energy advertising campaign. And then like I want to just like speed up a little bit. So this lawsuit was in San Francisco, and right before the suit was decided in December 1st, you see a huge spike in Chevron's advertising in San Francisco area, and we don't see such a spike for Chevron advertising in other areas. So in a paper, in the paper, basically, we are trying to figure out whether such spikes happen in like in areas where firms are sued, and whether there is lack of such spikes in other areas where the firm is not being litigated. And we also make this comparison by other firms in the industry in the same area and so on. So in a nutshell, this is pretty much what we do in this paper. Then we go into the details of like what exactly they do, which channels are they directed to do this, and so on. So at this point, I can stop. So I just want to give you a like 5 to 10 minute summary of the paper. I can take some questions, and then I just start getting into the the models and the other details. So.
Okay, so we have our first question for today is, would cases that got resolved outside the court be ideal for a placebo test?
We have a few set of tests for placebo. We don't see, so we have to see this litigation in the database. So if a firm is not litigated, if it's not, it doesn't exist in the, I mean, there are certain lawsuits which are kind of short. So you could assume they are kind of, they settled a little bit quicker. So they will be in the paper, and we could use the time spent in the court, perhaps like as a measure that to sort of like test this out. That's a very good suggestion. So I think we could do that that way. Yeah.
So is all this advertising effective?
So whether an advertising activity expenditure is effective is kind of a big question, in the sense that like we don't necessarily see, I mean, we do see some effect in terms of the court sort of deciding in favor of the defendant. Okay, so we see some correlation at the end of the paper. We have documented that, but whether or not we can cleanly attribute this to this particular advertising is kind of a it's a very muddy question. So we are not going to like hang our head and say that just this definitely affects the outcome big time. This is one of the influence channels, but we think that there is some effect. We have some calculations of ROI in the new version of the paper. We sort of try to correlate how much they spend and how much they probably made because of like winning this case. So, but those are all like in the back of the envelope calculation. So, I mean, the answer seems to be directionally yes, but I cannot necessarily give you a just precise ROI measure.
Okay, so what about the court of public opinion, which is probably national or even global?
That is correct. That in the sense that the part of the game is like winning the court of public opinion, but you try to do so in the region where you are being litigated. So Chevron, in this case, for example, may advertise all over the place, but the one that's going to give them incremental advantage in the lawsuit is the spike that they provide in San Francisco. So you may sort of like your brand may get damaged in lots of places if this event is like a national event, so they probably spike up your advertising in all over the place. Okay, but we also show this, like if the company is not big, if it's localized, so you try to win the public opinion, especially in the place where you are litigated. So it's like some of our evidence is geared toward that idea. So like you are right, but just the idea is like this is one channel again that we can measure more precisely.
Is it possible that advertising campaigns overlap with regional firm expansions, and such expansions also increase probability of a trial?
That's right. So that's a good question. Uh, so we do have some, like, within the specifications, we try to have, just fixed effects to put, like, for the firm and the DMA. So try to sort of see, like, this firm is being, like, it has the same market size potential, but if something happens around that time, it gets litigated, but they don't get litigated in the other place, so they don't respond to other. So in a way, what makes them litigatable in that region must be related to the market size to begin with. So, like, they go hand in hand. So that's a very good point.
Who decides on the choice between adjudicated trial and bench trial?
So it depends on the litigation type. So, like, I'm going to show some evidence on the litigation types, like the patent cases, for example. They do have a juror. So, like, you get, like 12 people who may have no idea about the type of the patent. They may have no idea about, like, what is the main issue. So if you, search Google for how do you pick a patent uh, jury, because there is some sort of, just like educational video that shows like, what the jury should be looking at and so on. So the point here is, it's certain types of litigation, we already know that it's going to be educated by the jury. Okay, so those are the types of litigation that we see the effect most. But there are certain types where, like tort and other types of litigation, where there is no jury, it's a bench trial, and we see less effect in those types of like litigation. So that's one variation we use in the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, the firms might also want to increase their media coverage in the areas. Do you also see that there's a spike in media presence of the firms in the area?
We didn't look at that. It's definitely plausible that, just the firms try to spin the media more in their favor. So there could be a hand-in-hand sort of relationship between advertising and local advertising and the local media coverage, but we didn't specifically get into the media coverage. So that's something that we could definitely do. I mean, I do have some research on similar areas, so we could look at that as a kind of like side measure.
So is it this entire problem limited to just a handful of industries, or this is a wide problem?
Our data is from all over, so all the litigation. So we didn't really screen on, I mean, we do have industry fixed effects here and there, but we didn't execute. So we do have a split based on whether the company or industry is a B2B versus the, like, business to business or business to consumer. So the idea being, business to business, companies, if the idea was to really advertise, because you are trying to cater to this consumer base, just like one of the questions was asking. uh, so we find that the results are also for there for B2B industries as well. So we do have such a split to sort of try to get to this point of, you are not really trying to repair the brand image with the customers, but you are trying to really affect the outcome of the lawsuit by affecting the, like, environment around the courthouse.
Okay, I'll ask one more question now and then we move on.
Sure.
I believe, well, not me, but the person asking, that less than 5% of the lawsuits filed against companies go to trial. The remaining get either dismissed by the judge or get settled out of court. Advertising can influence those outcomes too in the firm's favor. But is advertising particularly intense for cases that go to trial?
So that's a good observation. So, like, at the beginning of my talk, so I mean, our speculation was that if it's a really like big advertise, so big lawsuit, just it's likely to affect the firm. So they're evaluated why these are big cases. So, I mean, in a way, uh, I don't know if there's any correlation whether the type of litigation that's being, just settled outside early enough is kind of any different than the ones that makes its way to the courthouse. But that's a sample that we don't observe. So we only observe. So in a way, a claim on firm's cash flow is credible after you sue them. Maybe, like, the probability of getting a higher settlement is higher after you show that like you are basically suing them. So like as I was like telling for one of the earlier questions, like we can do some sort of analysis of the time or the duration of the lawsuit as a kind of a like measure to understand, just whether there is some dispersion around the like the way that firms respond to this event.
Okay, actually one more question now. So do
Yeah.
such decisions have a greater probability of being reversed on appeal to a higher court?
I don't know. It's a good question. So, I mean, there is some work that has been done in the patent litigation that there's a higher court occasionally reverses the decision. So I don't know, like, for whether or not like such reversal is like more pronounced in the lawsuits, like that are kind of in the other domains. It's something that we can look at. The data is not easy to get to, but we can definitely take a look, see like if the reversal rates are high, especially maybe if the firm has changed the outcome supposedly with its advertising, and then just maybe down the road you can reverse it. So we didn't look at that.
Okay, thank you. Let me defer the remaining questions till later.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks so much. These are great questions. Some of them, like I try to like give you some just like more precise answer when I show the data. So for those of you who are interested in like working in these in this area. So litigation data is coming from audit analytics. So we can see the type of the litigation, whether it's a patent, tort, or class action, and so on. We can also see other details like when the litigation happened. For some of them, we do see when the case was settled or like just decided by the jury or the judge. We can also see like settlement amount for a very small minor subset. And we do have some analysis that we collected these settlements from other sources. But overall, audit analytics is kind of useful to identify the beginning and the type of the litigation. So we are going to do this exercise using like at the geography level. So like we are looking at all the US data. DMA level advertising is our unit of observation. So I can see how much IBM has spent in Dallas Fort Worth DMA in 2010. Okay. DMA means designated market area, which is kind of the proprietary area definition for Nielsen. So it may or may not perfectly match to the courthouse that we are like looking. So we did a match between the district court area and also the DMA match, and that to sort of match these two data. And our data set is going to be, the unit of observation is going to be firm, year, and DMA. So major, like this triplet is going to be the unit of observation. So, and this is pretty much like, what we are going to rely on in majority of our sample. So top DMAs in terms of like cases: New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Like these are big areas. There are lots of activity going on for a variety of reasons. You would expect a lot of litigation to happen in these areas. But the one that may be surprising here is Shreveport. That basically is because of the patent litigation that I was showing you earlier. The Shreveport DMA happens to sort of coincide with the Marshall. Okay. So when you look at the dockets, so one of them is the securities. Okay, so this is a major one: patent, contract, tort, and labor. These are the top 5 cases that we could see from the database. So this is our main result. Okay, so I'm going to show you different versions of this table. So what we are doing is we are regressing the future advertising spending, like advertising spending at time t, on this dummy, like just a suit, and then we have a bunch of controls to sort of analyze the correlation between like how much your advertising increase given your current level of advertising. So our main sort of like the baseline specification we are going to use is going to have the firm times DMA. So like think of this as IBM or Walmart in Akron. So it stays kind of stable. Once you get litigated, the following year you see the spike, and it gets turned down. Like just it gets less going forward. So this sort of like captures that spike the year after that the litigation is there. Okay, so we are going to use different versions of this specification. One of them is like majority of the cases, firms do not advertise at all in certain DMAs, but the probability of they initiated advertising in that DMA goes up by like 25%. It's kind of like going from 0 to 1. The left hand side in this specification is a dummy. So as opposed to the previous one where you see the level of advertising. So this is kind of to say that that area happens to be uninteresting for you. You may be selling some product, you may not be selling any product there. You may have a nationwide advertising, which you may think that that's good enough to sort of appeal to the consumers in that area. But suddenly, the moment that you get sued in that region, you bump up your advertising significantly. So this is kind of like another way of like think about our results. Okay, so again, the main result of the paper is we observe this increase following the lawsuit only in locations where the firm is sued and only by the firms that are sued. Okay, so that's what just the nature of this parallel. So when you look at, the obvious idea here is, what happens to this coefficient if you were to just run this regression by like switching that coefficient of sued to the previous year's answer. Like if you regress instead of like regressing on the future advertising, what happens if you regress it on last year's advertising, the year before and the year before. So this is to show you that coefficient, how much the coefficient increases. It does increase following the lawsuit in the areas where you are hit by the litigation, but no such spike in other areas where you are not litigated. So this is to give you an idea about how the parallel trends look like. So we do have a bunch of placebo tests. So here, we create a dummy, okay, on top of the the correlation to show the correlation between the advertising and also the litigation activity for the company's own sort of being sued. We try to say, look, is everybody being sued in that industry? Maybe, just like Target is advertising in that area, so there's a bunch of firms being sued. So like, what do they do? How do they sort of increase their advertising? We do the same thing, whether or not just bunch of firms being so this the first one is that sued industry. The other one is like just if there's this kind of like an inflow, the flood of like litigation in that state, and then the last one is so just a lot of firms in the same industry in the same state is being sued. So we try to sort of capture, is your advertising, is above and beyond all these other activity that might be going on contemporaneously. So this is kind of like our first set of like attempt to show like the firm's own sort of litigation is really, must be, to a certain extent, that these measures are really capturing industry-wide, statewide, or industry statewide litigation effect. If the firm is being sued is what's triggering this advertising going forward. Okay, so that's basically it. So if we change the left-hand side to different measures, like instead of like looking at the like initiation dummy, or instead of looking at the total advertising itself, we change it to the market share. So like think of this as like Apple's advertising in Austin scaled by overall computer advertising in Austin. How does the market share of advertising for Apple increase following being sued? We still see this kind of a spike. Likewise, if you look at the Apple advertising in Austin scaled by total advertising of the Apple. So this, you can think of this as, does Apple shift a big part of its advertising at the DMA level to, so like we see also a similar correlation. So again, the idea is, just you put more dollars into this DMA. It is significant compared to other firms in the same industry, in the same DMA. It is significantly higher compared to your advertising share compared to your own advertising in other DMAs. So it seems to be they're like using different measures. So we have a very small sample sort of evidence coming from the charitable contributions. So instead of looking at the advertising itself, when we change the left-hand side to like charitable contributions, so these are like dollars spent by charitable arms of corporations. So imagine like Ford Motor has a charitable arm which happens to carry the same name. So this is a data set that's available from ProPublica. It's a nonprofit explorer filling in the form 1990s by the Text Example Organization. We have some evidence, but this is very weak, but sample size is small. So we think that this is also like another channel. As I said, advertising is one channel of influencing this public opinion, or like, and at the same time, the opinion around the courthouse. So charitable contributions seem to be also like operating in the same direction. So I'm going to take a few questions. Let me show you two more sort of evidences before I get into the mechanism. So this seems to be happening more and more recently. So we see when we split the sample in two parts, the coefficient is higher recently. When we look at like split by the DMA size, it seems to be pronounced more in the small DMA, sort of suggesting if you are putting $1 million in a small DMA versus a $1 million in a larger DMA, you are more likely to affect more people in a smaller DMA, and it's more likely to sort of be just like I mean, that's kind of apparently how firms are visualizing the relationship between these two. So that's basically a natural stop, I guess, that I can have before getting into the other sample cuts. Andre, maybe like I can take a few more questions here.
Sure. So let me take some questions related to the data and methodology. So is it common for a company to be involved in a second suit while the first is still ongoing in the same DMA?
It is possible for us. We don't count them twice. Like, we just, I mean, again, the unit of observations, firm DMA here. So if you have been to be sued 3 times, I mean, that's basically you are being sued in that DMA. But I guess like what the question, like, I don't want to read minds, but just it is certainly possible that just you have more sort of incentive to like spike up the advertising. So we could sort of cut the sample by number of times you are being litigated in that place. So that could be a good way of like getting at this like magnitude issue a little bit more in detail. So
what kind of advertising is captured in the data? I mean, for certain types, for example, online, it's hard to pin down location.
Yeah. So this it has been some time that I get into the details of this database, but the way that it was designed is organized back then, but there were like 9 channels. Okay, so you can see total TV, local TV advertising, which is something that we are going to use. Local radio, so billboards. You will have the local newspapers. You will see like national sort of TV advertising. You will see national newspaper advertising, like Wall Street Journal and so on. So there are like 9 channels. And when we say local advertising, we add up those that are catered to that DMA only. And we use that as our measure of advertising dollars, DMA level advertising dollars. So that's kind of the non-online advertising. For the online, like so there are like these days, like I have seen databases where they sort of try to understand, so they sort of break down the online advertising to DMAs to a certain extent, because like you can selectively show those things with the Twitter and the Facebook and so on. So we don't have that, but we remember like our data ends in 2014-15. So there is some speculation we have at the end of the presentation. I will sort of tell you. It's anecdotal. Seems like more and more firms like Facebook and Twitter is kind of like getting these advertisements more targeted in a more targeted way. Like, I want to target people between 30 to 50 in Dallas area for this group of people. So that targeting advertising is more likely to, I mean, this targeting, if firms think that this kind of way to affect the outcome, if it's going to happen in the future, our guess is it's going to happen through the online channels. And there is indeed some, like if you search for jury picking companies, so there are like professional companies that helps you to pick the jury and that helps you to sort of organize an advertising campaign and so on. It's kind of a consulting firm, and this is one of the services they provide to get into the like which specific channel that you should be looking at.
Okay, what portion of cases reach trial stages? How is the selection issue treated?
So one of the earlier questions were suggesting a 5%. So, so I don't know if there is any so I heard the figures close to that number before. We don't observe the infractions. Okay, so I mean, I may be pissed off at someone, and I may just speculate about going to the courthouse. I don't know how much of that is going to be deterrent unless I go to court. So on the one hand, you will say like the ones that make the courthouse are the ones who had the trouble of finding a lawyer, filing the lawsuit, and so on. So it must be really significant, and it shows that you are serious. So the ones that may not make it to the courthouse are probably not that important to begin with. So like that's one speculation I may have, but I really don't know. There is in the patent litigation, I do know that companies send some demand letters, and there is a group of law firms who are really professional, sort of like they send these demand letters and they say, look, this is how many times that we have sued somebody else. We are credible. Here's a demand letter. Here's a likely outcome. If you pay us this much, it's kind of extortion, you may say. We may not go to the courthouse. So there is a group of also litigation which doesn't go to courthouse, but they may also be important. So I don't want to speculate, but like it's a mixture of these two, and I don't know whether this is going to pose any kind of a threat to our analysis. So the idea here is like, why would you advertise in an area where you already settled outside courthouse? So you probably did the calculation in your mind, and then just that gets settled in a different channel.
And does the dollar amount of the suit matter? If a lot of money is at stake, would firms behave differently?
This is a very good question. So I guess the best way to respond to this question is something that we are working on to understand how much the firms lost value at the time of the news when, it gets revealed that a firm is going to have a legal trouble going forward. So it's not clear. So there is no clear database, a clean database where you can identify when the litigation news become news to the marketplace. So you can use the original filing date, but there could be some initial sort of discussion of such things like in the media or so. So it's not that clean, but we are doing some sort of analysis to understand how big of an event this litigation is for the company by using the market response. And we haven't finished that analysis, but that's one direction we go. But we are thinking that it's going to be a noisy measure. So I mean, there are ways to get to that probably. In the litigation, you wouldn't see how much is being demanded in the court filings. So like just at the end of the day, this could be some private discussion in the settlement discussion. We could see some of the settlements, very small minor amount of settlements that we use later on. But that's pretty much what I know from the data is available.
Okay, do litigants also increase advertisement in reaction to firms advertising? Do these increases cancel out?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
So do the litigants, so basically other firms involved in the suit, also those who are filing the suit, for example?
So we look at all the plaintiffs and the defendants. So I mean, most of the analysis is for the defendant. So if in a litigation, multiple people are litigated, we look, all of them happens to be one observation for us. So if IBM and Apple get sued by one company, one sort of plaintiff, then these are two different observations for us. So we separate them out. I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah, but we do also have like plaintiff-related analysis, like what do the plaintiffs do? So it seems like plaintiffs also advertise. So they not only sue the other guy, but they also bump up the advertising. So this is kind of saying that, look, just I mean, I'm not really being. I'm going to get something out of this, just assuming that you are right, okay? But they also play this game. We have some evidence of that in the data that we document.
Okay. Do firms advertise more if the case goes to trial? After a case is filed, about 95% again get settled, dismissed. I'm not talking of disputes that get settled before lawsuit filings.
Do firms advertise more if the case
goes to trial? First, you have a filing of the case, and then if the case goes to trial, do we see basically there is an additional increase in advertising?
More so that's basically what we are documenting. So like the firms goes to trial, okay, and then throughout the duration of that trial, there is advertising, especially close to the end, okay, that sort of gets bumped up, and then it dies out. So we are looking at what happens after the firm is tried. So after the firm is kind of in the court when the case is adjudicated by the judge. So that's basically this, yeah.
What's the composition of plaintiffs in terms of individuals or corporations? How are the court locations chosen by plaintiffs?
Yeah. So there's definitely forum shopping in certain type. I mean, this is known. Okay, so in bankruptcy, for example, that certain judges are known to be uh, like plaintiff friendly versus defendant friendly. Likewise, like the reason why East Texas happens to be, just like plaintiff friendly is because like just there are a couple of judges apparently they said this kind of a something that has been discussed by others, who happens to sort of uh, admit a lot of these trials like by applying a lower sort of threshold, like what is the case or what is not the case. So there is forum shopping. We didn't do any kind of analysis with respect to forum shopping. So we do have fixed effects to sort of to get to like just like make the comparison within the same DMA for all the firms in that place. So that sort of gets to that, but that selection itself is not part of our modeling. Okay. Now, with respect to the composition of the so when we impose this analysis that I was talking about the plaintiff, like being so this is a corporation, public corporation, that sample size is small, which sort of suggests there are lots of non-public plaintiffs. There are also a lot of kind of individual or like other entities, which may or may not be, it could be cities, it could be, some other entities, doesn't need to be individuals, it could be groups of people like suffering for some reason from the same company. So we didn't do any kind of analysis of the plaintiff type. Uh, so like I guess like that could be one valuable information. So like you could speculate maybe just like that gives you some signal about whether or not public is really outraged about like the company. So whether there's more need to pump up the advertising if you are being sued by, let's say, like pollution. Okay, so that could be something that could be a good measure, I guess. I don't know if that's kind of what you are getting at too.
Okay. Let me defer the main questions to later stage.
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
these are very good. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. I'm like I'm learning a lot. Awesome. Okay. So jury and bench trial. So again, uh, average jury is kind of like 50 years old, lower than mean education, high school, bachelor's, no bachelor's degree, limited legal expertise. So like anybody in this sort of audience probably is not a like a representative jury. The definition of a jury is kind of a definition of a serial killer. Like it has to be male, less than 50. Just like, so like this is kind of like if the idea here is like with advertising, you are trying to influence the decision of this jury or the judge or the court environment where this jury may get influenced or so on. Uh, so it has to be more pronounced in litigations where you see like just like whether there's a bench trial or so. Okay, so if this is basically the idea, just we try to sort of like make this separation, and we try to see like the types of litigation where the jury period is likely to be affected seems to be more correlated. Okay, so that's basically like what we try to do. Now, this is not a perfect test in the sense that within a litigation type, there could be also certain type of litigation where just like judge may just ask for bench trial. Okay, so this like data is not super clean, so we try to go by the litigation type. Okay, but there could be further sort of like variation within the litigation type where some of them may be jury, some of them may be bench. So this is a very noisy sample. So what we are finding is, just we see significantly higher advertising. So like going by the coefficient for like patent litigations, as in like compared to the tort litigation. Okay. Now, the remaining sort of two analyses kind of getting to this like concept of affecting the jury pool. So the idea here is like again going by the like who's an average jury member. Okay, so like if you go with the statistics published by the Justice Department, so if you really want to spend your dollars wisely, you should be going after people between 45 to 55, and that's kind of the prime demographic. So we have this data set which shows us exactly, again, this is another Nielsen data set, which you can get through the University of Chicago databases. So it shows you, okay, this is the prime time. So you do have this advertising for TV, but this is how much you spend for this time slot. So we can identify whether you are spending your dollars at the prime time, or are you sort of trying to spend more dollars during the time that children are more likely to watch the TV and so on. So we try to sort of play with those numbers. So what we see kind of interesting here is, again, we people with these types of companies seem to sort of like advertise more around the prime time. Okay, so this is like the, and then just if you think that these like children viewers as kind of like placebo, okay, they advertise less in that area. Again, the idea here is like just you're allocating some dollar, you already decide to allocate more dollars into this DMA, but within this DMA you also have a choice with respect to which channel you are going to go, and even if you go with the TV, like just at which time slot is kind of going to bring you more power. Okay, so we don't have that sequence of selection. Like kind of there's a big selection going on, like coming to this pool. But assuming that just all advertising dollars are kind of created equally, like just if you are showing the tendency to the to spend more dollars like in this prime jury segment, that's kind of like just an indication that you are really using this as a strategic weapon. So this is kind of our like just way of getting into this mechanism a little bit with this data, because we think that this is kind of a cool cool evidence. So the next evidence we have is about kind of like ROE divide. So we try to sort of how much of a dollar do you spend per audience. So we take the dollar amount, we scale it by the number of people. Like there's a data field in this Nielsen data set that shows how many people are there in that demographics in that DMA. So we try to get this like per dollar advertising, and whether or not you're likely to sort of your dollar gets more return on investment if you advertise. If you like, just do you spend more if you are more likely to get more bucks out of this investment. Okay, so we try to get to this like ROI idea in an indirect way in this analysis, but there is a similar analysis at the end of the paper. The whole idea here is, again, just like we try to utilize just $1 million in a small DMA and $1 million in a large DMA. We know that they are not equal. Like if you spend $1 million in an area where there are like 1,000 potential jury members, that advertising dollar is likely to be more pumped up. So you think that this is going to affect the outcome more, and you advertise accordingly. So that's basically one evidence. So again, going back to one of the questions, so like potential explanations. For example, we know that BP oil spill happened along the Gulf Coast in Texas. You would expect BP to spend more sort of dollars in the Texas area because they are being sued. But you could also say, look, this is just like like your brand image has been damaged a lot. So because like your brand needs to be repaired. Okay, so there is naturally a reason. Again, going back to one of the questions that was asked, the reason why you are really like pushing advertising here is you're trying to protect your sales. You're trying to bring the customer base again. You are doing this not because that this location is the place where you are being sued. Okay, so I mean, obviously this is a very like nature sort of response by the corporations, and it's perfect consistent with the evidence I have shown so far. But we have certain just like reasons why this may not necessarily explain everything. Going back to this litigation by the litigation type, like why will this happen more if it's a patent litigation but not just a bench litigation, other litigation. So like the fact that in the patents, just average consumer, like if there is some sort of harm done because of patent infraction, patent infringement, average person in the society wouldn't know about what's going on. So like why would you increase your, like for Samsung, increase your like advertising in East Texas if for this reason. So that's kind of like one evidence that really helps us to sort of say, look, brand image brand image sort of repair is one reason, which is plausible, and it must be going on also at some level, but it doesn't explain our evidence so far. And this is kind of like it's also like there's a significant increase in the initiation. So like just this is a place probably like you never spent advertising before, but now suddenly you initiate advertising. Okay, so again, this is sort of inconsistent with not inconsistent, but this doesn't totally explain or in square with the idea that it's only by brand image repairment. So. And after the losses are over, this spike that we have been showing, it dies out. So again, just if this is like, unless you believe that this brand image damage is kind of permanent, then, just like this kind of like, is one evidence that we think is kind of more in favor of like jury idea, jury sort of appealing to the jury rather than appealing to the consumer. Like, along these lines, we have two sets of evidence. Okay, so another evidence that we have is we run the same specification for B2B companies. Again, the idea here is, this is really happening for consumer-facing industries, then it should be happening on the non-B2B industries. But we do find evidence that also seems to be happening for B2B industries where there is no consumer, so you don't really need to repair your image for in that DMA. So again, this evidence seems to be suggesting that there is an active engagement with the media and advertising world to affect the outcome of this litigation. Another one is, again, plaintiffs. These are not again, if I'm a plaintiff, if I'm suing you, there's no reason to repair my brand damage because I am the one going after you, but I do also increase advertising. So this is basically the same specification that we are running with different sort of fixed effects. We show that the events, the sort of the correlation between the litigation and also advertising seems to be happening for the person who is like supposedly just like getting affected by some activity of the defendant, but these guys also respond in the same way. So another sort of kind of lack of evidence, I would say, which may sort of like, again, suggest that advertising is a strategic tool that firms use. It's a very small sample, but the whole idea here is tobacco industry is just restricted to advertise a lot. I mean, they don't necessarily just advertise in a more unconstrained way, just like the other firms do. So we looked at the like areas where tobacco firms are being sued and how do they respond to this event. Around the same regression, we find no result. It's negative, it's insignificant, small sample, non-results. So I'm not going to take too much out of it, but just if we were to find a positive correlation here, I guess like I mean that will be kind of difficult to explain with our sort of like hypothesis. So we find no result here. Restriction of advertising obviously like prevents you to use this tool as a way to address this issue. Okay, so again, charitable contributions, I talked about this before, so I can stop here again. This is an initial point before I get into the very last point where I talk about the economic impact of the verdict. So I can get some questions if you want.
Okay, how much of the increase in advertisement is driven by firm versus firm litigations? For these cases, I imagine a large increase in advertising.
Okay, so how much of the increase? Okay, so you are saying. Okay, so could you repeat that question again?
Again, I'm reading this from chat. So how much of the increase in advertising is driven by firm versus firm litigations? For these cases, I imagine a large increase in advertising.
So we do have remember, like we do have, I don't know if this is a perfect answer to your question. We do have a firm DMA fixed effect. And on average, if you are advertising a certain amount in that region, okay, that's kind of the time series average of that. So this increase is off of that base. Okay, so just in a way, the result that I'm showing, like 25%, for example, is on top of what you do there, 25% is what you do in advertising due to this litigation. Okay, so that's kind of like, I guess, like how I get the question. I don't know if that's the answer.
There are a couple of more questions, but I think you largely answered them already. So let me kind of pause here. Oh,
sure.
well, Sorry, another clarification, and I don't think it's getting any clearer for me. But okay, let's move on, and probably there could be a few
Okay.
more questions down the road.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks so much again. Okay, so I have about 15 minutes or so. So now the issue is, okay, so firms do this. Okay, so I think the evidence so far we have shown is like left and right in all the sample casts, just like seems like firms actively engage in strategic use of advertising above and beyond like what they do. Okay, so like with the advertising, so they bump up this advertising in certain times, and other firms don't seem to be doing that. So like, given that there is like this use of advertising, does it work? Like is this a negative MPV? Like maybe like firms do this, just does it do, what do they get in exchange? So now this is a difficult question. Like I will show you some analysis, like how we think about it. But I want you to sort of envision this as kind of advertising is just one like part of the litigation strategy. Okay, so the firm is thinking probably other means to affect the outcome. So they may be spending other dollars on other activities. That's number one. So advertising is just part of it, and we are basically seeing this outcome, which may be attributed to multiple things that firm may be doing at the same time. So that's number one. Number two, we don't see the outcomes perfectly. So we do see that if you really go into the, like, I'm sorry. Okay. We do see that firms settled. Okay, if there's some outcome. If you go to the dockets, okay, you could say dismissed by whatever reason. I mean, that dismissal does not necessarily mean that the defendant won. It doesn't mean that dismissal is kind of in favor of the plaintiff. So it's kind of hard to say that the case ended in favor of the defendant or the plaintiff. But there is a subset where it says that the defendant won. Okay, so like just in some of the cases it says the judge ruled in favor of the defendant, judge ruled in favor of the plaintiff, and it ended with a settlement. So we do have some data. It's a very small subsample. Again, it seems like just we have again some sort of a correlation that we think is kind of interesting. As the defendant as spending increases, the defendant win rates go up a little bit. Okay, so off of the win rates, okay, so like 44% of the cases that we are able to codify the outcome, this 44% goes up by like 6% to 50% if with one standard deviation increase in the defendant ad spending. And you could also say, just like what happens if like defendant also advertises. So there's a negative correlation, so which we think is kind of like really interesting. I mean, with your own advertising, your defendant win rate increases. With the defendant advertising, your rate of like just win, it sort of decreases. So this is some new evidence that we are going to put into paper. Again, we are going to came up with all these issues of like how we coded the data and so on. But we think that there is some sort of expectation that seems to be materialized with the outcome. Okay, so the 6%, whether this is big, whether it gets translated into a big market value change in the companies. So the cross section, like the heterogeneity, is too big. So so we don't really want to say that just ROI from this advertising is like 51%. So that will be that the standard deviation around that estimate will be too large. Okay, but this is kind of like how much we sort of this is kind of what we have done so far. But if you have some suggestions, probably one of the suggestions about looking at the firm value change, like around the announcement of the litigation versus like the conclusion of the litigation. Again, those dates are fuzzy. It's not like earnings announcement where everybody knows that there is an earnings announcement and we wait for it and the news hits the market as a news. Okay, so the events here are kind of fuzzy. So that's kind of one keyword that we have in mind in this analysis. Okay, so we haven't done that yet so far, but there's some place where we could sort of put some numbers on this economic impact. So stepping back, just before I take the final set of questions, there are like tons of, so whenever we go to present this paper, I usually pick out an example that happens to be like in that area. So I will show you some of them, just TiVo like was again sued sued in East Texas. Like in response, they got into this auction to buy a bull in the farmers sort of festival. They even just like named this kind of like just event as kind of like people already know that TiVo has been sued there. They are trying to buy the public goodwill again, like Chevron evidence I have shown you already. So this is an evidence from Chicago. So when I presented this last year in Chicago, so we got this email from Bloomberg, just after we posted to NBR. So one journalist said, look, there's a case going on with the State Farm, and they have been sued because of RICO. This is like basically corruption-related lawsuits. Uh, the journalist wanted to know what happens. Okay, so basically, could you sort of like help us see like if there's any kind of spike? So this is the Chicago State Farm advertising. So as you probably, I mean, just like guessed, okay, so this is the area, this is the environment where the advertising spike is happening. Okay, so State Farm policyholders get a class action lawsuit of $1 billion, and so that happens to be the case. Now, the issue here is, there is a spike here. In the second case, okay, you could say what's happening here. Again, that's around the time when there is some settlement. Okay, so this is the time, that's the State Farm. Okay, so just supposedly, just advertised around the time when this class action was being formed, but they also advertised a lot right before the decision was given out, handed out by the judge. Okay, so that's basically one example. There is plenty of, just again, discussion about what Facebook and Twitter is capable of, like from the election side, we already know that. That's kind of very mediatic. But some people told us that, just this is also something that, especially these like, jury selection companies or consulting companies, they do advertise it this on their website that, that they they use such channels also in their like litigation strategy. Okay. So to conclude, okay, uh, so we think, we try to document some systematic evidence of what firms do with the advertising dollars when they are taken to court. Okay, so we show, the evidence that I have been showing you so far, just show that there is a spike in advertising. This is not trivial, about like 25% from a very large sample, 1995 to 2014, across all the industries, all the public firms. Obviously, just like we are not speaking what private firms do. So like at least with this subsample, we see a spike in advertising, but we see no increase in the same stay by the same firm before the advertising, before the litigation. And this advertising seems to die out after a certain period of time, like about 2 or 3 years, which is kind of the median time for a litigation, by the way, if it's not gets settled soon. Uh, there seems to be no such response by the competitors or by the same firm in other areas. There seems to be some dollar shifting from another DMA to this DMA that you are being litigated. Uh, it seems to be large. It is significant present throughout the present day, like in small pronouns. Uh, Recently, and when I say recent, up to 2014, we see this in B2B companies, so it's not really a story about like you're trying to buy the goodwill from the customers. There seems to be some evidence that that this is kind of like just at least happening in the channels, like the TV channels in the time slots where the prime jury members are more likely to watch the TV. So there is some sort of shifting of advertising dollar. So that's basically the overall sort of evidence in this paper. So and the questions I've received so far, just suggest that there is some more stuff that we need to do. But I'm hoping that just you will remember this paper with these messages.
All right, great. Thanks so much. We have a few more questions. So, are the effects bigger when the plaintiff is a company as opposed to the government?
I don't know. We can check. But that's kind of I guess like what you're is the question like when the plaintiff is a government. I guess like I'm guessing because like the firm is responding if the plaintiff is government, like My speculation is like the results should be there regardless of who is suing you, because like you are effectively trying to affect the outcome. I mean, according to our hypothesis, the jury and the judge and the environment. Okay, so my guess is like who sues you wouldn't be that much important. It whether that plaintiff's advertising is kind of affecting is kind of like we do show that it seems to be affecting your outcome, but I, I'm not sure if there's any reason to believe it should matter one way or the other.
Okay. Would defendant firms, if feasible, substantially reduce their sales price, say in grocery, to give way to potential jurors and their families?
Okay, so let me read the.
Yes, so this is second to last question. Would defendant firms, if feasible, substantially reduce their sales prices, say in grocery stores, to give way to potential jurors and
uh,
their families?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, that will really reduce the subsample to a group of firms, which we can observe uh, the product prices. I mean, if it's an automobile company, maybe like they will run another week of like Labor Day sale, like just I don't know, just like there could be other ways to sort of like payback from a different channel. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of so I cannot figure. I mean, I haven't heard any kind of anecdotal along those lines, whether like, but with the fact that we find it for B2B seems to suggest that like this is one channel that we can focus on and measure and like study, but that could be something different that might be issue. Yeah,
Okay. Do firms
interesting.
increase the local advertising to affect the outcome of the trial, or just want to reduce the negative reputation impact that may affect revenue? Well, I think
So
you answered that question,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. A couple of tests tries to sort of address that issue. Yeah,
Okay. Would you say such practices should be restricted or even banned?
interesting. Uh, I mean, this is a free country. So I guess like I don't know how it could be implemented one way or the other. Okay, so I don't think if there is. So there are kind of like we heard that judges asked the jury members to turn off their cell phones and just like not to log into just Facebook or Twitter around the times of uh, the court time. Okay, so I mean that's kind of like becoming more and more like something that the judges say, not necessarily for the type of litigation we are looking at, but this is just if the issue is being discussed in the media, and if you can hear what the media in a very like I mean you are sort of supposed to not to read these newspapers around this time. Okay, like that's kind of a one direction, but the fact that they are asking like less restriction on Facebook and Twitter, it's kind of a suggestion that like judges are doing this in an indirect way. But I don't know if there's a blanket thing that government or government can do to sort of like circumvent this. So, that's a difficult question. Yeah,
Do you
similar
think
to
that
like advertising for the elections, right? So I mean, it's kind of in principle like what should Facebook do, right? If there is a fake news and so on, along those lines. Yeah, interesting.
do you think there might be any learning effect on the part of the jury where they may be more resilient to manipulative advertising in DMAs where this kind of behavior is prevalent?
Yeah. I don't think like jury members are repeatedly selected in big cases. Like I mean, if you are lucky, unlucky, I don't know, just depends on how you call it. So you will do this once or twice in your lifetime. Like so learning will require multiple instructions. So but in a place if it becomes really so much like outrageous and then like you hear these types of things being happening again and again. So I mean like there could be some learning, collective learning, but I don't think like just individual learning will apply here.
Okay, so let me take the last question for today. And have you looked at the economic impact by contrasting lawsuits for which there are 8Ks versus no 8Ks, so not
Uh-huh.
material?
Okay. Uh, the way that the audit analytics define the database is anything is material is in their database. So and then one place that they collect the data is 8K. So in a way, so like we are looking at 8Ks now. Are there like if you were to look at a database where things are not so if the firm is calling it material, it must be in the 8K, so that means it must be in audit analytics. But if there is a litigation that firm is not considering material, okay, it's in some other database which we don't have access at this point. If it's not material, so I don't know if that's something that we should be worried. So I mean, there's some sort of chicken or egg here. If it's material, it should be in the database because firms consider this as material and they disclose it in 8K. So